Hi, Michelle. It's so beautiful to have you back here on the Mood Lab. It's actually so funny because you're the first person ever to return on the podcast. So I think I never had anyone to repeat so far. But I'm so excited, to talk to you again and to have this conversation, especially with you having your book out. But you're going to tell us all about that in a moment. And so maybe for everyone who hasn't been listening to the Mood Lab a couple of months ago, maybe you just want to share with everyone who you are and what you do. And
Sure. Well, I live in America, and it's so much fun to talk to someone in Portugal and makes the world feel so small. So thank you. I love that. My husband and I got married when we were 24, and we've been married almost 40 years. We're coming up close on that, but not quite. But both of us really wanted to have large families, and that is becoming more and more unusual. So that was a real bonus when we met each other and found out that that was true of both of us. And we met at church, so we were both of the same faith and the same mindset there. But large family, we didn't know what that meant. Turns out it meant 6 children for us. And we have 3 boys and 3 girls. They're all grown. 4 of them are married. And they're actually the reason that I jumped onto Instagram and decided to start writing about marriage, because as they left the house and they got in the workplace and they went to their own churches, people were they were very surprised that Steve and I had been married for so long, that they came from a home where the parents were still happily married. And the kids and their friends, they wanted to know why, how did that happen? And they said, Mom, you need to write about it. So, and I love writing. That's was my major in college, and it's something I default to. I love reading. I'd always hoped that I would write a book, but I didn't know how. So I started writing Instagram with advice, just stuff that I've learned that I think is super helpful. And then my followers were so sweet. They would say, why don't you write more? Write a book and I'll read it. I said, well, I'll write a book if you promise to read it. So I've been working on that for the last 2 years, and I just published it last month. The book is actually called Hey Beginner Wife, which is the same name as my Instagram account. And I came across that phrase. I was talking to a wife and I said, look, you're just a beginner. Be patient and give yourself some grace. It's okay. You're a beginner wife. Your husband's just learning. He's a beginner husband. You're on your way to something great. And in retrospect, I thought that phrase really communicates a lot. If you understand that you're a beginner and let other people encourage you and seek encouragement, I think a lot of times we don't know that we would benefit from sitting down and talking to someone else about what we're going through. So that's why I entitled it that way. Although I will say, you don't have to be a wife to follow my account and to glean something from it. And you don't have to be a young wife either. I have women who are 10 and 20 and 30 years into their marriage, letting me know that they're really enjoying what I have to say. And I say, well, it's because I'm still learning too. So it's not like we ever arrive. And I haven't arrived either.
No, I think that's so wonderful. I mean, I'm one of the people who are following and reading everything, and I am not a wife yet. So, and I really enjoy your content so much. So I think it's so needed. And we talked about this last time. I think you just said it when you introed yourself, that we live in a society, in a culture where it's not very heard of to have big families or to have long-lasting marriages. And I think especially when we have a heart for marriage and we actually want to be married, or we just newly are married, but we want to have that marriage sustain, and we actually have a dream of that, and we really feel that is for us, and we want to really have a sustainable long marriage with children and live, I guess, in a society would say in a more traditional way, I guess. With that, it can be so discouraging to look around and see that the world doesn't really function this way and that it doesn't work out for many people. So it's so beautiful to have someone pour into you like you do, where we can learn of the fact that it actually works and that it's actually possible. I think that just is so beautiful because it gives courage to step out and be like, hey, this is my dream and God has put it on my heart. And I'll, like, obviously, if He has someone for me, I'm going to fight for having a marriage that is sustainable and that sticks together, and that, yeah, just two people who are raising children together. I think that's so beautiful to have that encouragement, really. Yeah, so I love that. I would love if we, yeah, just could dive into your book a bit. I think the first thing to start off of is, I mean, you already shared with us a bit whom your account is for, but when you were writing your book, you probably thought of like the person who just got married. But yeah, whom did you think of? How did you approach writing to that person? Did you think about yourself as like when you just started out being a wife? I would love to hear how you approached writing this book.
Yeah, I actually did have a woman in mind when I was writing it.
Yeah.
I was going through my children's friends and thinking, I need to pick someone who I think is
Yeah.
my ideal audience, my target audience. And I thought of women my daughter's age, and my girls are now, their ages 30 to 35. And when I started writing, they were late 20s, early 30s. And I thought of the kids they went to high school with and the families that they came from, and yet what it was like to have those women in my home with my daughters, and seeing the hopes and the dreams that they had for getting married and thriving, and yet not having an example or someone to go to and talk to. And I thought, I want to talk to that woman, and I want to say, you know what? Marriage is available to you. And it's not just marriage, but a happy, strong marriage. And you may never have seen it, but I want to tell you behind the scenes. So I really was trying to go behind the scenes in a marriage and talk about these are the struggles, these are the mistakes that you make, and this is how to stand back up and make it work. You don't have to quit, because people quit in marriage because they don't realize that falling down is normal. They have an ideal in their mind, and I'm here to say, okay, here's the ideal. Let's switch it. Let's not get concerned and scared if you fall down. Let's talk about how you can get back up. So I wanted to talk to the woman who really had hopes and dreams, but maybe felt like it wasn't going to be possible for her. So
Yeah.
the baseline of all that is to come alongside of someone and encourage them. And that's really the voice I was I think that's the voice that I was able to hang out in and just speak as an older woman, as a mom, to these younger women that are either wanting to get married or newly married and thinking, oh my gosh, this is a little bit harder than I thought.
Yeah, I think that's so beautiful. I was literally we talked about this before we switched on the recording, but you saw me being at this Thanksgiving event here where we gathered just as a community, and we had our own Thanksgiving here, which is so fun because obviously in Portugal it's not a thing, but having Americans around, it was just beautiful to celebrate it for the first time. But what really stood out to me on that day was I just had this moment where I just felt like, oh my, I just appreciate so much that I get to be around family. So I, for the first time in my life for the past year, get to be around families who have children and who have like functioning families. So there is a man and there's a woman and their kids, and they do life together. And it's such a blessing to witness that, because I personally come from a family that is not functional in that way, that actually broke apart over the years. And so I always had it in my heart that I don't want what my family portrayed to me, but also not having another glimpse into what is actually possible and only having it in your head, kind of. Sometimes it can be really hard. It can be discouraging because then you talk to others, and then just a couple of days ago someone recommended me to look into this person on Instagram who just talks about divorce and how women have to prepare themselves, and I was like, no, this is not where I want to come from. Like, you don't go into marriage with divorce in your mind. That's just the wrong way around. And so I think that is how women in a lot of circles, though, are thinking. And that is like what women are preparing themselves for and are concerning themselves with, instead of actually yeah, going into a marriage with an open heart and a heart for, okay, I want to make this work and I want to go alongside someone and go on to this journey and really go into almost like a team situation where you team up with someone in a way and you create a
Right.
beautiful life together. And so I think it's so beautiful that you have exactly that person in mind who maybe doesn't have a glimpse into what is possible, but kind of knows it in their heart and have that desire for it. But through you and through what you're sharing, they can have this, yeah, this mom figure in a way of someone who's done it and whom we can learn from. And it's so beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, and I would say that for that very reason, that's why I think my book would benefit someone who's not married yet, because it
Yeah.
gives a very practical overview of marriage. And I just couldn't help myself. A couple times in the book, I said, so this is what you should look for in a spouse, because I thought
Yeah.
if you're reading, if you're not married, take
Yeah.
note. This is what you're doing. Think about that too. So all the reasons you just stated makes me really excited. I want to hand this book to,
Yeah.
to a young woman and say, read this. Don't go follow an
Yeah.
account about divorce. And in fact, my last chapter on characteristics of a happy marriage is make a decision that you're not going to get a divorce.
Yeah.
That's the very last chapter. And I just wrap it up with, the beginning of my journey and where I'm at right now and how satisfying it is to be almost 40 years in and have a history of good
Yeah.
times and bad times. And it just defines the marriage and makes it stronger.
Your book is set up in 16 chapters, if I'm
Uh-huh.
correct, and it has like 16 essential characteristics that you're going into. So I would love if we could just pick some of those and yeah, and just dive into those because obviously these characteristics can help us to, yeah, navigate finding the right partner, but also making marriage work, creating a vital and happy marriage over time, which would be so beautiful to have. So I would love if we could just dive into some of those. You can pick the ones that you want to
Okay.
start with.
It's kind of hard to pick because I feel strongly about each one of
Yeah.
them. I will say, though, so here's my book. I will say that the first chapter is called Being Hardworking. You can do hard things. And I kicked it off with that because the more I've thought about traditional marriage vows, and I don't know if they're traditional in Portugal where you are, they feel very universal to me. I'm not sure, but it's, I take you to have and to hold for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, good times and in bad. And I think about the for better and worse, and we all go through seasons of for better in a marriage and for worse. And it might be for a myriad of different reasons. But when it's a worse season, it's a hard season. And that's when
Yeah.
you really need to be grounded and think, this will pass. It's just a season. And so I kick off the book saying, you can do it. You can do hard things. And just because it's hard, it doesn't mean it's bad. And I picked, I believe I picked in that chapter, the hard thing that we went through was going through an earthquake that cost my husband his livelihood. He was self-employed, and the earthquake actually ended up destroying his business. And so our income dwindled. And at that point, we had 5 children, and I was staying at home. And it was hard. It was just so
Yeah.
difficult to figure out, wait, our one income has now been drastically reduced. He's having to work even harder. I'm having to pick up more of the slack. And in that season, knowing that we were on a journey and had a shared goal, and I talk about having a shared goal and how that gives you the framework to just hunker down and say, we are doing this together. It's like deciding that the two of you are going to train for a marathon, and you go out and you practice and you do all the practicing and you're sore and you're tired, but then you end up doing it, and the thrill and the exhilaration that comes, you don't look back and despise the days of training or despise the day when
Yeah.
your big toe is wrapped up and sore and you're soaking your feet in an ice bath. That's part of it. And so that chapter talks about hard things being part of reaching your goal, and that it's not a bad thing. It's just hard, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
in fact, that chapter I decided to make available on my website for free. if somebody is thinking, oh, I don't know about this book, I mean, some people will think, yes, I want to get this book. Some people might
Yeah.
want to tiptoe into it. And if that's someone, my website is heybeginnerwife.com, and just scroll down and it will say download the first chapter for free. So go ahead and do that, because then you'll get a taste of what the rest of the book is like. Can I hit another chapter? Or did you want to say
Yeah,
anything?
of course.
Okay.
No, you can hit another.
Okay. I did a chapter on expectations and
Mm-hmm.
how expectations creep up on us. We take them so for granted as part of we are, that we don't realize it's our expectation. We might even think, well, everyone feels that way. Like a really simple one would be like,
Yeah.
my expectation is that my husband will take out the trash. That's kind of a universal expectation, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Or
it may
pick up
not.
the socks or
It's
something
little
like that.
things. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then when it doesn't happen, then he has now failed. And
Yeah.
he's failed only because we had an expectation that we didn't talk about. So I start that chapter off with what my expectation was. And I had a whole list of what I was hoping to find in a spouse. And I added to the list because I thought, well, I might as well be specific, and it helped me with my longing to just kind of jot it down or write it down or how to pray. And then I met Steve, and he wasn't the man on the list. He was probably, 5 of the most important things, but there were a few that I had to go, okay, well, that's not for me, right?
Yeah.
And then you let go of that. But some of the things that were my expectations that I had to let go of, I didn't realize were my expectations until later. And those things, when they rear their head, they can make you frustrated and angry with your spouse because you feel like they're not pulling their weight, or they're not doing what maybe you agreed, but you didn't really agree. You assumed that they would do. And so in that chapter, I talk about how to climb out of that. It's not really a pit, but the pit that you are in, to get back to the place where you really appreciate each other. Because if all you can see is where he's failing, it's hard to appreciate them. And so in that chapter on expectations, I talk about, wait, just stop and let's go back to finding the things you appreciate about him. Let's focus on those first. And then where he's falling short, let's have a conversation about him of why he's falling short. Like a simple thing, it's usually task oriented, but if he's falling short because you're like, honey, my car needs an oil change, and why haven't you taken it in yet? And he's like, why haven't you taken it in? Or how am I supposed to know it needs an oil change if you're the one driving it? It would have been nice if you had told me 500 miles ago, and I could have taken care of it for you. And just a very calm, rational discussion can kind of root that out. And then you can go, well, next time, how about you let me know when you're, 500 miles away? It's just all those little things that we have to figure out when we're married. So I really do like that chapter. It's super, super practical. And that's what I want people to have, is practical, because that's going to help us incorporate it for yourself.
That's so good. I think something that I'm kind of picking up from what you're sharing is as well that it is truly a journey. Like, you won't ever marry a perfect person, right? I mean, we all know that. We are marrying a person that has as many faults as we do, like quirks and things that just are specific to us. And so everyone comes with that. And then at some point we meet someone where we are deciding, okay, I really like this person and I can imagine doing life with this person. But we don't really know much more than that, right? I don't know about you. Like, when you think back, probably you never would have thought your life would go exactly the way that it went, right? You didn't know exactly how many children you would be getting and how those children would be. Like, you don't know those things. You didn't know that you would start a channel talking about how to be a beginner wife, or how to be a wife and how to make marriage work in a better way. You didn't know all those things. And so what I find really important, especially for women and men really, for everyone who aren't married yet, is knowing that you don't know yet how your life is going to unfold, and it's really those practical things that you can implement while you're growing together. And that, I don't know what your take on that is, but that almost makes me think that obviously we can make wrong picks and right picks in our partner, and certain things need to match. But there's not just one partner for us. Like there would be several people whom we could do life with and do it well together if we practice building a beautiful foundation together. I don't know if that is,
Yeah, no,
if
I
you would
agree with
agree with
you.
that.
I do agree with you. I think I have one chapter that's called Marry Your Match.
Hmm.
And one thing I think is foundational is that people marry someone who shares the same faith that they share,
Yeah.
the same values that they share. Um, it sets you up on the same foundation. So, absolutely, I write about that and why it's important. And one of the things that was important to me in writing this book was that it be accessible to everyone. So, regardless of what their faith is, I wanted them to find in this book principles that they could succeed at marriage, even if their faith wasn't the same as mine. Because if they
Yeah.
marry someone else whose values are the same as theirs, then they're on the same page and the same footing. So I
Yeah.
put that chapter in there because I believe it's vital. And like you said, that you can find someone within your framework, many someone's within your framework that you can work with. The skills that are going to set you up for success are where you go from there. Once you've found someone who is your match, then there's a chapter on respect and what it looks like to honor your husband. That one is
Yeah.
probably the most important chapter in the whole book. I say that because for me it would have been. I
Yeah.
completely misunderstood what respect means in a relationship. I thought, you know what, of course, I want to be respected, so I'm going to respect you. We've got mutual respect, just baseline. But then I would hear men talk about being respected and how important that was. And I did not understand what they meant because I thought I was already doing it.
Yeah.
And my husband didn't talk about it. We were doing great, how we interacted with one another. But I heard a teaching, and I believe I spoke about this on the last time we were together about
Hmm.
respect and how women define it and how men define it. And so that chapter was very important to me, and I spent a lot of time writing it. I did have one gal came back and she goes, "Okay, that was worth the price of the book, just that chapter alone." So I think that is critical. But that if you know how to appreciate, I'm a good word for respect is to appreciate, to show appreciation
Yeah.
for your man. So if you know how to appreciate someone else, especially the person you're living with, you are miles ahead of success in your marriage. So that chapter for sure is significant and worth just really reading once, twice, or three times. And I actually did write a companion guide to go with the book. So if women want to do it together in a study group or a Bible study, then they would get both. They would get the book and the companion guide. And the companion guide is great for discussing afterwards. The
Yeah.
book, I don't put my faith into it so much. But for those who are Christians who want to make it more
Yeah.
of a Bible study workbook, buy the companion guide too, because that's where all the scripture is that substantiates the
Okay.
principles that I'm talking about, right? So the book itself you can give to your coworker and not think that, they're going to go, whoa, I don't go to your church. But you can still talk to
Yeah.
them about their life and their relationship because that's what we have in
That's
common.
true.
That's what we want to share with
Yeah.
people. People want to learn and talk about thriving in their marriage. We all want success there. So,
Yeah.
anyway, that's the setup of how it is. Another really important chapter is on being selfless instead of selfish. And
Yeah.
Carina, you're not married. And so I remember when I wasn't married and I'd hear people talk about,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, you never know how selfish you are until you get married. And I would think, okay, I'm
Yeah.
pretty selfless. Like I'd been on mission trips, I would volunteer, I would help my friends out. So I really thought that's probably not going to be my story. But there is just something that draws out selfishness, like getting married. So that chapter is in there and it's really helpful. Um, I will say it probably is more going to resonate with people who are married and who are in the middle of it and going,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. What is like one of the things where something that you picked up where women just like are like, well, I want to make this about myself, you know, like being selfish, and it's like, what is like one of the examples that you've noticed or something from your life where you were like, yeah, I was pretty selfish with that.
Well, in thinking about it, I think one of the reasons we justify being selfless is we don't trust our partner to figure it out and have our best interest in mind. And so we advocate for ourselves strongly rather than, and then that is communicated as not trusting them. So years ago when we were expecting our 6th baby, I had to go on bed rest, which ridiculous. Like, why couldn't I have been on bed rest for my first child, right? I had to be on bed rest for number 6 when 5 are running around the house.
Yeah.
So my husband served me a lot, and he would bring me something like, like let's say a cup of coffee. Well, I like my coffee really hot. And so he would bring it to me and I'd be like, thank you, honey, but could you please microwave it? And I really feel like some of my requests were selfish because I'm advocating thinking, well, if I don't do this, maybe, of course he knew I liked my coffee hot. Of course he did. We'd been married, how many years by then. He had a reason for not being able to get it to me hot. And I got in there and I was annoying because I was not
Yeah.
trusting him to take care of me. And then as time went on, as I was in bed for a couple more weeks, months, I just learned to let go and let him win and succeed rather than correcting every little thing that he did. And selfishness can very easily turn into critical remarks. So I can really, if I'm being critical, I can usually boil it down to, oh, it's just me being selfish or self-centered or whatever, It's a journey.
It goes so well as well with the respect, right? If you always like nag at someone because something isn't like exactly how you would have made it, like that
Yes.
just makes it hard for the other person to ever like feel like they're doing anything right. So having that appreciation through like just being grateful that actually someone is serving us and actually is helping us. And yes, in a situation we can be like, yeah, it's like now it's like the husband's job to help us out in a way as well. But if we just take it as that and not appreciate it, then we just easily fall into that trap of being like, oh, but don't want it this way. I want it a different way. So I think it's so beautiful, like how these two also match together, the selflessness and just being more accepting and more appreciating. And then that equals having respect for the other person and actually appreciating that the other person is helping out and is trying to, step up and step in a way. So I think that's so great. So, I mean, you already kind of said that these were also some of your major lessons of your journey, but I would love if maybe there's another one that comes to mind. Yeah, one of the biggest lessons in your marriage early on, and then maybe also something that you feel like you're currently still learning. That would be lovely to dive into. Yeah.
Yeah. I really brainstormed on things that I learned that I could share with someone else because I think that's really helpful to just be vulnerable. So one of the things I learned that I worked on, took me a little while to learn it was how to apologize to my husband. I was raised as to be a good girl. I was the oldest girl. So I was an overachiever kind of thing. So I tried really hard. And in my trying really hard, I didn't like failing. And so when I got married, I was trying really hard to be a good wife. And when I would fail, now it felt like a failure to me, but really it was just real life. It was just what happens. But for me, because it felt like a failure and it was hard for me to admit that I had failed when I was not trying to fail, I was trying really hard. It wasn't the intention of my heart. I really struggled to admit that I had done something wrong. If I snapped at him because I was irritated or tired, I would think, well, I was tired. Like, that's not my heart. I really, so I shouldn't have to apologize because my heart wasn't like what I said, I really didn't mean. And so I just wasn't very good at apologizing. So the problem with that is you can't restore a relationship. So if I snap at him and he feels like, whoa, where did that come from? I don't want to be around that woman tonight. There's no restoration because I'm not coming back and saying, I was wrong. I am so sorry that I snapped at you. Learning
Yeah.
that if I could just own it, and owning it didn't define me. It didn't mean that I wasn't a good wife. It didn't mean that I was failing.
No.
It just meant maybe I was tired and I snapped, and I might have I might have offended him. And so just a quick check-in and say, honey, I am so sorry. I was wrong to snap at you. I'm really tired. I know that's not an excuse, but would you forgive me? And then he is so quick to forgive and go, of course, let me give you a hug. And then you're done. And you're back
Yeah.
to being restored. And I didn't know it could be that fast and that quick. So once I finally learned that, it made a huge difference. And there was a lot more lightheartedness. I wasn't carrying around this weight, and we weren't at odds with each other because we restored things really quickly. And I
Yeah.
do have a whole chapter on forgiveness. And I think even before you get married, to find out if the other person can apologize and can they
Yeah.
let something go, or they're going to hold it on. We certainly can learn to forgive, but if that's a real challenge for someone else, it's something to work through if you identify it beforehand. But yeah, I have a whole chapter on that for sure because it is so important. Something I'm still working on is
Yeah.
holding my tongue and correcting my husband. I am so much better than I used to be, but I honestly do think I have figured out the best way to load the dishwasher, or the best place to park when we go to the store, or the best way to make the bed. I mean, simple things that I have to
Yeah.
let go and think, I don't need to correct him if he didn't make the bed my way. He made the bed. I need to just be
Mhm.
thankful and appreciate the fact that he did that. For whatever reason, Carina, that is still a challenge for me.
Yeah.
Is just holding my tongue and saying nothing. Um, yeah, it's just, I
Yeah.
have a lot of compassion and understanding for women that just say it, you know, because I think,
Yeah.
no, don't say everything you think. Really, don't do it. Don't.
Yeah. But I mean, that one is truly a hard one, especially, I mean, just thinking about myself now, having lived quite some years by myself. And even then, you just establish things in a certain way. And I already noticed that when just friends are coming over, I really have to like consciously make a decision to step back. And like sometimes, for example, when I have friends for dinner over and they help me to clean up after, and they do like the dishwashing, I sometimes like I literally just look away and let them do their thing. You have this certain way of like how you let the water run and use the sponge, and how you try things. And it's so funny because we are such creatures of habit,
Yes.
and we like get into things and we think like, yeah, we've perfected that because we've done it for a really long while and has a system. And then someone comes in and they just do it differently, but it's also their system. So for them, it's exactly the same. It's like it works perfectly for them. So
Right.
you have to, in that moment, be like, oh yeah, that's their thing. I'm gonna let them do this, and I do it differently, but I cannot be bothered by it. And even if I am, I have to like let that go, because yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't get you anywhere really. Yeah.
Yes.
So I really resonate with that, even unmarried.
Well,
I
and I
think
use
that's
that
gonna be a
example
fun
in my
journey.
book. I say, would you respond the same way if your friend came over? Because usually we have
Yeah,
more self-restraint with our friend, right? Because we
yeah,
enjoy them and we know they're not
that's
living
true.
with us. They're just going to go home. We can let it go. Um,
Yeah,
but we should also adopt that with our husband of we can
yeah,
let that go. It's okay. This is his house
absolutely.
too.
Yes, it adds a totally different layer because that person would, like the husband, would do the dishwashing maybe like that every single day. And we could be like, maybe from tomorrow onwards you do it differently. But with a friend, it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna do this like once in this
Right.
way, and then tomorrow I can do it my way again, you know? So I absolutely see that's like such a difference. I'll be curious to see how that goes for me once I'm married. It's definitely gonna be a funny thing to learn and to grow into for sure. I also would love if you, yeah, just talk a bit about, and you talked about this already a little bit, establishing a core set of values with your husband and balancing those roles as a wife, as a mother. I mean, for you of six, six at one point, tiny humans, now grown
Right.
ups. And yeah, just how, like what are your thoughts on like how to balance that? Any tips, recommendations, any things that you learned in that? I think that is something that a lot of women ask themselves, like how, and like as well, like husbands as well, how do we balance that? And yeah, how can we make that work?
Yeah. So establishing shared values. Um,
Yeah,
First off, it's going to be your faith and your values, and that probably would come up when you're dating. Um,
yeah,
Things that are non-negotiables for you. I know for one of my daughters, her non-negotiable was that he not lie. She's like,
yeah,
I just can't do lying. And they were on a date, and he lied about something to someone else, not to her. And she said, "You just lied to him." And he goes, "Well, I know what to say to get out of it." And she
yeah,
thought to herself, "We're done because I cannot do lying. That is so important to me." And she told him, and he was shocked because it was not a value to him. He was able to justify
yeah,
why. So I think there's a few things like that that will be discernible when you're dating. And if not, I mean, that's a lot of the reason why reading a book together is a great idea. The Meaning of Marriage by Tim Keller is a great book
yeah.
about
Love that
marriage.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great one to
it's
talk
good.
about. But I think most couples that want to marry someone with the same faith values are going to discern when they're still married whether or not they have that. After we got married, what we really had to establish was on parenting. What are our core values? Because you don't
Yeah,
get into that when you're dating. So we were fortunate enough to be able to take a parenting class that was offered at our church that was in person. It was very long. It was like 14 weeks long. And every week we had homework.
hmm,
And one of the things that happened in this class was we talked about how we were parented, what that was like, if we agreed, what that felt like. And then we talked about principles of parenting and how to do it according to this author. Um,
hmm,
it was like a discipleship program that took us through
yeah,
our childhood and revealed things that we'd never talked about before, and how we didn't want to do that for our children or how we did want to do that for our children. So for us, a lot of our core value discussion came up when we were talking about how to parent and why it was important to us. So that's an
yeah.
interesting way to go about it. Not sure that works when you're dating, but it's a good discussion to have rather than just flying by the seat of your pants once a baby's born and thinking, we'll we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It really is a conversation to have. So for us,
I think
that's what that looks like.
that's so good. Yeah, I think that's so good. It's a question that you could probably like discuss without getting into too much depth because you can't really because it's kind of maybe still like a little bit further removed. So, but you could still bring it up already in the dating context, I guess.
Sure.
But so cool, like to have a course on that and actually, or even if it's like a book on how do I take care of children and how do I raise children, and then discussing that and just discussing like, do you agree with those things that are said in that book or don't you? I think there are so many options to do this, but it's so good to set the groundworks for that as well. Yeah,
Right. Yeah, I
so
would
that's
agree.
amazing. So was there anything that stood out to you in terms of, yeah, something that you felt like you needed to come onto the same page with your husband while when it came to like values and parenting and all the things? Like, was there something that stood out to you that you both had to establish? Because like for you, you already said like your faith was the same, so like that was established. But then from there are so many other things that we do differently. Was there something that stood out in your marriage?
Yeah. One difference that we had was how we would approach gift giving with our children.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
because his family, they seemed to me to be more generous in their gift giving. And
Yeah.
so I was just raised to hold back a little bit more. And also, I think part of it was just what my parents were able to afford. And so we might
Yeah.
get some things secondhand. I mean, a really brief example is like Steve was in scouting and they would go camping. And he's like, well, my parents bought me a brand new sleeping bag and a brand new backpack and new boots and everything he got. He needed everything on the list he got. They went out and bought it brand new. And I said, so when it came time for one of our children to do something, I said, well, I can go get that used. I know, I mean, let me just look online and find a used one and we can borrow that and we can do this. So my natural response was, let me scrape this together,
Mm-hmm.
using what I have. And his was,
Yeah.
well, but I want him to have brand new everything. And we had to talk about why, what did that
Yeah.
mean? Um, so that came up for sure. That was kind of a surprise. Yeah,
Yeah.
that to me was the first thing that comes to mind. And
Yeah.
I mean, another one for every couple is going to be how to discipline your children and train them. And what is your
Mm-hmm.
response when they do something that they shouldn't do? And
Oh yeah.
what do we train them in, and how early do we train them, and what does that look like? And um, that's going to be true of everyone because everyone has a different experience and a different why for why
Yeah.
they would do that. So it's super helpful to find a third party book or teaching or even another
Yeah.
family that's been through it and you admire
Yeah.
them and you ask for their advice.
Yeah. Just a question upon that, it just came to my mind because I feel like a lot of people, when they get married for the first, I mean, I think there are two camps. There are some who really struggle in their first year, even without having kids, and they just have a really hard time as soon as they get married and it's kind of like sealed, and they start to live together and all those things, and that obviously comes with its own challenges. But then there are also like the other camp of people who just really start to struggle as soon as they get their first child, because obviously it changes the dynamic. Do you have any advice or like words of wisdom on that? Because I feel like that can be very discouraging.
When I think of sealing, your relationship and sealing the relationship in marriage, marriage is
Yeah.
supposed to protect you because there is
Yeah.
a safety that comes when you know that the other person isn't going to leave. So marriage has just been misunderstood and mistreated and abused and discarded. But marriage, the way God intended it, is a safe place to protect the love that you have for one another because you're not threatening that I'm going to leave you.
Yeah.
God never leaves us. And one of the reasons we can just relax and feel like a child in his presence is because he's like a big, huge father he's not going to leave you. Like, okay, throw a tantrum. I'll be here when
Yeah.
you're done. And getting that support and commitment from your spouse, realizing that it's more of a commitment that I believe in you and I believe in us, and we're going to make this happen. I think talking about the fact that marriage is more like a covenant than a contract that you can break, and reading something
Yeah.
about that. I mean, I would read, it's been a while since I read Tim Keller's book, The Meaning of Marriage, but I think that is one that would be super helpful to help give you the vision
Yeah.
of this is for the long haul. It's for better, for worse. It's for richer, for poorer. It's in sickness and in health because we don't know what sickness is coming our way. We don't know what
Yeah.
poorer season is coming our way. But it's looking at it and going, I'm on your team. I'm going to do this with you. I love you. It's a continual affirmation of, okay, look, honey, this was hard, but we're doing it. We can get through
Yeah.
this. It's kind of like giving each other the pep talks. So I think reading a book like mine is helpful because it gives you a picture of, oh, that's how you do it? Well, I can do that. It's the
Yeah.
unknown. We don't know what happens behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then with having children, I think one of the things to be very mindful of is it feels instinctual that when a child comes, that child is now the center of your world because they're weak, they need help, they're not going to survive without
Yeah.
you. Um, and so we put them in the center of everything, and they are the priority. And then our marriage
Yeah.
takes the back seat. And usually, who suffers in that is the husband. It's more evident that he's suffering because the wife has a little baby. The baby's being fed.
Yeah.
She's feeling maternal and like the mother, and she's a success as a mother. And she thinks, well, I'll be a success as a wife in 10 years when I get this little child up and running and, in Little League
Yeah.
baseball. But it is, it was very pivotal to us to realize that no, our marriage was still the center. We had to be strong. And even if it took 5 minutes a day, and sometimes that's all it takes, is just stop, give each other a kiss that lasts for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, something more than a peck, and a big hug and say, honey, I love you. I believe in you. You're doing a great
Yeah.
job. That focus once a day, and the children need to see that too. So I
Yeah.
think what's missing and what makes us afraid is we see so many families that put their marriage on hold to focus on the children. And when they go back to the marriage, it's not there anymore. And then they get a
Yeah.
divorce. So, when I say children aren't the center, they're important. We're not going to overlook their needs, and they're not going to be harmed in any way. Like I said, it can be 5 or 10 minutes a day to just care for one another and check in, show some affection, remind one another of how this all got started. It was you loved each other and you're married.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, not just slip into a child-centered lifestyle and leave your marriage to suffer.
I think that's such a great point, especially also the fact that it's actually so beneficial for the children to see the parents loving each other well and
Yes.
having that connection, because that is exactly what we talked about in the beginning, that is, for example, what I haven't seen growing up. So having that is actually so beneficial to someone, because then they have that glimpse into, oh, this is actually possible. I can actually have and live a life like that. And also just gives way more nurturing. It just gives way more safety,
Mm-hmm.
because you see that you have two people who are a safe net for you, because they also connect and they also are one team. And that just like sets the child up for so much more success in life than someone who has to deal with a broken family system and who has to deal with two parents who kind of just get by. So I think that is just so valuable and something so beautiful to always make sure that that is your focus as well, and that you don't let that slide too much, because it is so important to just continuously work on what you have in front of you and not having the children to like distract from that fully. I think that's a very good point. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
really love that. Another thing that came up to me, and I also already kind of touched upon that earlier, when I talked about someone sliding into my DMs with divorce advice, but I also think that there's so much going on right now around. I see that in you, that you actually you set aside, as if I know correctly, you set aside your career for a long while to raise 6 children, and you actually step back into working, and now you're doing another really cool thing of like, well, writing a book, having an Instagram account, and all those things. And I noticed that there collectively is a big fear for women that once they would step aside from their career, that they could never get back into it, or that they would be set up for failure at some point, that they would not have enough to sustain themselves later on. Obviously, that comes also from that mindset of maybe I won't have my partner anymore at some point, because that is something that people are fed and nurtured with exactly that thought. So I just would love you to talk on, yeah, what is something that you would say to women who are fearing not being able to step back into a job, or yeah, doing the thing that they love because they have maybe sacrificed some of the things that they could have done for actually having children.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't get the message that raising children is a noble calling,
Yeah.
that there's no one that can replace a mother for that child. And we think that our careers are going to have a lasting impact or be very significant, or they're going to give us an identity and define us. And we underestimate the feeling, the affirmation, the self, well, that's probably not it. We underestimate how we'll feel as a mother, how gratifying it is, how satisfying it is,
Yeah.
how one person can make a difference. And I think that's huge. We think, well, I'm just impacting a 2-year-old. I could be leading a team of 20 people and making a
Yeah.
difference in their life. And we don't put value on just the one or just the 3. And yet,
Yeah.
for that one or those 3, we're the hero in their little life because no one else can
Yeah.
take our place. And part of that comes from our relationship with God and knowing that He values just the one person. You know, He said if there
Yeah.
was 100, he talked about sheep, you know, and He said if a shepherd had
Yeah.
100 sheep and one of them was lost, he would leave the 99 and spend time to go find that one. So part
Yeah.
of parenting truly is a very godly calling, because it's choosing to place value on the one and leaving the 99 for a while. And that's a little
Yeah.
hard to do if you don't esteem that. So part of what helped me out was realizing God is happy with what I'm doing. But I
Mm.
felt very affirmed in parenting through realizing that. And also through my girlfriend, who was like 5 years ahead of me and who was a mother, who would just encourage me in that and in mothering, and how
Yeah.
mothers are the ones who influence and shape the character of those who grow up. I mean, look at the people around us who are making poor decisions. Did someone
Yeah.
invest in them? I mean, do you know that in the prisons, the majority of the men in the prisons were raised without fathers, without a
Yeah.
father's influence? So what is the influence of a parent? Well, we can look at the prison system and see what the influence of a
Yeah.
parent is. So what we're doing, unfortunately, is behind the scenes. It's not praised. I mean, I would go to parties and with my husband, it's kind of like, oh, what do you do? I said, well, I stay home with our
Yeah.
children. And then no one knows what to say. Like, because it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, who cares about that? Or anyone could stay home with
Yeah.
their children. There's an excellent book that I would recommend people reading. It's called In Praise of Stay-at-Home Moms. And it's by
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Laura Schlesinger. And the whole book is her affirming mothers putting their focus on parenting their children. Now, if you're a
Yeah.
stay-at-home mom, you have put your career on hold. But I do think if there's women who feel very, very strongly that they need to work, they can still read that book and glean from it the affirmation that parenting is noble, that it is a
Yeah.
career that matters, that has value, that's irreplaceable. Um, I think too, it's hard to imagine um, what it feels like to be a parent and how rewarding it is. I mean, I
Yeah.
wouldn't trade it for anything. The reward that I feel from seeing who my children are in this world and what they're doing,
Yeah.
and how much time I have on my own now that they're raised, just like I have a whole second life. But it's
Yeah.
hard to imagine when you're younger, because you feel like you have to seize the day and take advantage, of the
Yeah.
time that you have. But I would recommend that book for people because she's a cheerleader. She dives right in and talks about how
Yeah.
important it is to parent.
That's so amazing. And I also think that fear of, oh, I can't, like, once my kids are out of the house or something, I cannot go back and do whatever I want to do. Like, I think that fear is also quite irrational because in a world like the one that we are living in right now, we always have the opportunity to do something. Like we can,
Mhm.
obviously, we have all the opportunities. We can volunteer, we can actually take on any kind of job. And yeah, maybe we cannot like go from being a mom to like taking on a CEO position in a field that we've never worked in, of course, because we just haven't worked in there. But that's okay. That doesn't mean that we cannot have a fulfilling job or do something fulfilling even after the kids are out, for example, or even just like following a passion. I think there are so many opportunities. And I also do think that something that you said that always stands out to me is like, does anybody like ever think about what amazing people can be raised? Like, you have such an impact onto like the generations to come just
Mhm.
by focusing on your children. Your child could be someone who's like, I don't know, inventing something or helping people or serving others, like doing great things, And I always feel like people forget to talk about that, forget to talk about the impact that one mother can have on their children. And for you, it's like 6 of them. So like it's just incredible to think about, and that just makes it so worthwhile to put in the effort and to step aside. And that doesn't mean as well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know, I mean, probably with 6 children that must have been like, the time must have been more limited. But if you have like 1 or 2, you could still do some things on the side and like go do something that is fun to you, like something that fulfills you and fills your cup, like here and there. I think we always have that possibility as well. So I do think in that case as well, it's just important to communicate with your husband. What are some things that you would like to continue doing, or like what gives you joy? Is there something that you don't want to give up? I think there are many options in the world that we're living in, and even with like home office and all the things, there's so much potential. So I think there's the fear of being a stay-at-home mom is not, it just doesn't seem like reasonable to me, but it's such a thing that people have, yeah, made into something so big. And of course the part of that, it's just not cherished. And if you go somewhere and you would say, I'm mostly staying at home, or I'm only staying at home, basically,
Yeah.
that's like the part where people are like, okay. And if you would say, oh, I'm like leading this kind of company, or I'm doing work in this and this field, they were like, oh, tell me more. But instead of, yeah, asking you maybe like, yeah, okay, so what fulfills you, what lights you up in your day-to-day life, and just asking a simple question, that would be so easy to do. So yeah, I think that's beautiful. We have such an opportunity to change the narrative of that as well, especially in my generation. I feel like we can make a difference, especially as Christians as well, because we know that God values us all the same, and different roles doesn't mean different values.
Mhm.
So I think that gives us a beautiful opportunity to go forward as well. Yeah,
Well, I
it's
think you said
amazing.
it better than I did. So I good job.
I've had some practice now.
Uh,
I feel
I
like
I
this
actually
is one of
wrote
my
there's
my favorite topics. Yeah,
there is a chapter in the book
yeah,
about having children and embracing that the
yeah.
role of being a parent.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
that's amazing. Yeah. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you still want to share?
Oh, wow. Um, Let me think. I I mean, it would be a whole nother hour to pick up on and more topics and things I don't want to share. I think I just really want to encourage people to either get the book, read it, enjoy it, get the companion guide
Yeah.
if you want to dive deeper, or if you want to include some girlfriends and make it a study guide. And if you're
Yeah.
not in a position yet to where you think, oh, I'm going to grab the book, then go to my website and get the first chapter for free. I'm really
Yeah.
confident people are going to find value in this book, and I just want to get it in their
Yeah.
hands. So there's so
Yeah.
much more to say, and to encourage women that I I don't know where to begin with, unless we,
Yeah.
like, you gave these questions that were great. So yeah, I would have people either go to Amazon and look for the book. It's basically worldwide. I don't understand Amazon
Yeah.
entirely, but I know you and I were talking, and you said that in Portugal you can purchase from Amazon Spain. I know there's some
Yeah.
people in Europe that can purchase from Amazon UK.
Yeah.
But on my website, which is just heybeginnerwife.com, there's some buttons for, I think it's 10 different Amazon storefronts that are not
Okay.
all the US, so people can explore that too. Um,
Amazing.
but yeah,
Yeah.
it's just,
I'll
I'm excited to get people to get it
yeah.
in their hands.
Yeah, I'll link that in the show notes as well. And I just feel like my takeaway, honestly, is that it's actually pretty practical. Like, marriage isn't like, it doesn't need to be crazily complicated. It can be very practical steps that you can take and things that you can figure out and be like, okay, I need to like lay this down. I can't behave this way. That's maybe something that I need to change about myself, and I can appreciate my partner. And there's just like all these little things that are so, I mean, they're so simple. They're not always easy to do, but they're very, you can almost grasp them. So you can learn about them, you can learn about your behavior and what would make it easier to communicate with each other. And the communication is obviously one of the biggest things anyways. So I think that is just so encouraging because it makes it less daunting to step into marriage and to decide to be married one day and to hope for marriage, or even when you're at the beginning and you are either getting married just in a couple of weeks, or or you just got married a couple of weeks ago or something like that. It's so encouraging to know that it is possible to have a long-lasting and flourishing marriage and to be happily married, really, and to
Yes.
come out at the point of 40 years of marriage, like you already have in your yearbook in a way. You can get to that point and you can say that I did this well, and I tried, I gave it my all, I gave it my best, and it actually worked, and I got to a point where I'm happily married. And to say that after 40 years, I think that's for a lot of people nowadays unheard of. So I think just having that is so encouraging. And so I just want to encourage everyone as well. Get the book, read it. Also to get onto your Instagram, because your posts are always so cool. I love how you always take like a little scenario of what people are finding themselves in, like this in this situation, and like how you can handle the situation. It's just so helpful. So I just encourage everyone to go to those resources and and just see for themselves that it's possible and that you can have a long-lasting and happy marriage and that you can stay together. I think, that's the main point that I feel like I want to get across on
Perfect.
my side as well. And that encourages me personally too. So yeah, I think we're gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
I am so excited that we did this again, and I'm excited to share this with everyone. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom and just being such a light. I feel like just talking to you just makes me happy as well. It's
Oh, I
beautiful.
love that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
It's good to
amazing.
spend time with you again. I just really enjoy you and your
Yeah,
account and what you're doing with Mood Lab. That's great.
yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.